The nets are coming up wrong. 200 feet of braided line pulling through iron davits, and the woman standing at the winch cannot close her hands around the crank. Her fingers curl inward like something dying, knuckles locked at angles that make no anatomical sense. And she is pulling anyway, pulling with wrists and forearms and teeth clenched so hard the enamel cracks against itself. The deck pitches 20 degrees to port. Water comes over the gunwale in a flat black sheet that hits her at the waist and nearly takes her off her feet. Somewhere behind her, a man is shouting her name, but she cannot hear him over the sound of the ocean trying to swallow this boat whole, and she does not stop pulling. The nets surface. They are full. 3,000 pounds of Atlantic cod, silver and writhing, spilling across the deck in a living carpet that buries her boots. The weight shifts the hull. The boat groans. And the woman's legs give out beneath her, not slowly, not with warning, but all at once, like a switch thrown in her spine. She goes down hard, shoulder first, into the pile of fish. They thrash against her face. Their tails slap her neck and cheeks. She does not get up. She lies there in the cold and the salt and the smell of a catch, staring at the sky through a gap in the storm clouds. And her crew stands above her in a half circle, for people with salt in their eyes and terror on their faces, watching the best captain they have ever known try to remember how to make her body work. That woman's name was Maren Solberg. She was 42 years old, and her nervous system was dismantling itself from the inside out. And in 7 days, she was going to do something no one in her village believed was possible anymore. Not because they lacked faith in her, because they had eyes. But this story does not begin on that boat in the North Atlantic, in the middle of a storm that should have killed everyone aboard. It begins 5 months earlier, in a kitchen that smelled like coffee and iodine, on the morning Maren's hands stopped obeying her for the first time where someone else could see. Ravik sits on the northwest coast of Norway, population 412. 390 if you count only the ones who stayed through winter, which is the only count that matters, because winter in Ravik is the test and everything else is intermission. The village is the kind of place that exists because the sea permits it, a clutch of painted houses wedged between granite cliffs and water, so dark it looks like oil, where the economy is fish and the culture is silence, and the greatest compliment you can pay a person is to say they never quit. Maren had lived there her entire life. She'd taken her first boat out at 19, which was young even by Ravik standards. She'd made her first profitable season at 21, which was unheard of. By 30, she was running 3 boats and employing 20 people. And when the old captains gathered at the harbor in the pre-dawn dark, their breath making ghosts in the cold air, they said her name the way you say the name of weather. Something permanent. Something you planned your life around. Her father had been one of those captains. Halvar Solberg. A big man with hands like rope-burned stone, who could read the current by watching the way gulls tilted in the wind. He had taught Maren everything she knew about the water, how to mend a net in force 7 conditions, how to find the shoals by the color of the surface, how to keep a crew alive when the sea decided it wanted them dead. He would take her out on the boat when she was 6 years old, set her on a crate in the wheelhouse, and name the waves. "This one is hungry," he would say. "This one is lazy. This one will try to turn us. You watch how I answer it." He was the finest fisherman Ravik had produced in a generation. And when the doctors in Tromsø found the tumor in his stomach, he did something Maren never forgave. He stopped. Not all at once. First he sold the smallest boat, the Havern, the one he'd bought the year Maren was born. He said maintenance costs were too high. Then he stopped going out in bad weather. He said the forecasts weren't worth the risk anymore. Then he stopped going out entirely. He sat in the kitchen of the house on Bryggerveen and drank coffee that went cold in the mug and looked out the window at the harbor. And when Maren asked him why, when she stood in that kitchen at 20 years old with her hands clenched at her sides and her voice breaking, and asked him why he wouldn't fight, he said he was tired. He said the sea would still be there. He said there was no shame in knowing when a fight was finished. Halvar Solberg died on a Tuesday in March in a bed that faced away from the window, because by then he could not bear to look at the water. He was 56 years old. The cancer did not kill him. Maren was certain of this then, and she was certain of it 20 years later. Standing in her own kitchen, with her right hand trembling, so violently that coffee was running down her wrist and pooling in the cuff of her sweater in a brown stain that spread slowly through the wool. The cancer did not kill Halvar Solberg. He killed himself by agreeing with it. She set the mug down carefully with both hands. She pressed her palms flat against the countertop and held them there, willing the shaking to stop, pushing down against the granite, as if she could force her nervous system back into obedience through pressure alone. It took 90 seconds. She counted every one. Her brother Jonas was sitting at the table behind her, pretending to read the newspaper. She knew he had seen everything, because Jonas always saw everything. It was his gift and his curse, this inability to look away from the people he loved when they were suffering. He was 7 years younger than Maren, 35, broad across the shoulders the way their father had been, with the same instinct for the water and none of the same stubbornness. Jonas had been her first mate for 15 years. He was loyal in the way that only siblings who have survived the same wound can be, not out of obligation or habit, but out of the shared understanding that the world had already taken the worst thing it could take from them, and everything after that was just endurance. He did not mention the trembling. He turned a page of the newspaper with deliberate casualness and said, "Strand's people are in town again." Maren wiped her wrist on her jeans. "How many?" "3 suits. They've set up at the Havnekro, buying rounds for anyone who'll listen." "Anyone listening?" Jonas folded the paper slowly. "Thorson signed last week. Kvistad's talking about it. The Lindgrens are already gone, moved to Bergen. Their house is dark." Maren turned around. Her brother's face held the expression she had come to recognize over the past year and a half, the careful blankness of someone trying very hard not to say what they actually think. She had seen it on the faces of her crew when she stumbled on the deck. She had seen it on the faces of the village council when she spoke at meetings and her voice caught on a word. She had seen it on the face of Dr. Holm in Tromsø when he showed her the MRI films and pointed to the white lesions blooming across her spinal cord like frost spreading on glass, and said the words progressive and irreversible in the same sentence. "So 3 more boats gone," she said. 3 more families with money in the bank, and no reason to check the weather forecast ever again. That's not what fishing is. "I know what fishing is, Maren." She held his gaze until he looked away. The tremor returned, fainter this time, just a flutter in the tendons of her right hand, a whisper of mutiny from nerves that were slowly losing their connection to her brain. She slid her hand into her pocket. "I need you on the Natsvale by 4, she said. "We're going out." Eirik Strand was not a villain. That was the problem. Villains are simple. You see them coming, and the only question is whether you're strong enough to stop them. Strand was harder to fight. He was a man who had once been exactly like Maren. He'd grown up in a village 100 kilometers south, same cliffs, same black water, same economy of nets and silence. He'd left at 22, gone to Oslo, then London, then back with enough capital to buy a fleet of industrial trawlers. His company, Nord Sea Corporation, had spent the past decade acquiring fishing rights along the Norwegian coast, one village at a time. The method never varied. Lawyers first, studying licenses and ancestral claims. Then suits with buyout packages generous enough to seem compassionate. Then, once enough captains had sold, a legal challenge arguing the remaining operations were commercially insignificant and the grounds should be opened to industrial harvest. 11 villages had already died this way, turned into postcards, summer homes for Oslo families, harbors where the boats were decorative. Ravik was next. The thing Maren understood, the thing the suits buying drinks at the Havnekro would never say aloud, was that Nordsea's legal strategy depended entirely on proving that the village's traditional fishermen could no longer sustain viable operations in the disputed waters. Every captain who sold his boat made that argument stronger. Every empty berth in the harbor was a piece of evidence. Every dark house on the hillside was a data point in Strand's favor. The arithmetic was simple and merciless. Once enough boats were gone, the court would rule that the ancestral rights were defunct, Nordsea's trawlers would move in, and within 2 seasons Ravik would be a memory with a postal code. Maren attended the first public meeting about the offer on a Wednesday evening. 47 people came. A year ago, the same meeting would have drawn 120. The empty chairs told the story more clearly than any legal filing. Nordsee's representative was a woman named Sigrid, polished, warm in the corporate way that communicates respect without promising anything. She spoke for 20 minutes about transition support and economic realities. She used the phrase dignified transition 4 times. When the floor opened, Nils Thorsen stood up. He had already signed his buyout. His boat was sold. His check was cashed. That made him dangerous because freed men speak freely. "We all know what this is really about," Thorsen said, and he looked directly at Maren. "She can barely hold a tiller. We can all see it. Her hands shake. She falls on the deck. She's going to get herself killed out there. And she's asking the rest of us to follow her off a cliff." The room went silent. Maren felt 46 pairs of eyes migrate to her hands, which she had placed flat on her thighs beneath the edge of the table. The tremor was manageable today, a low vibration, barely visible. On bad days, it was not manageable. On the worst days, her legs stopped working properly, and she walked with a lurch that made people step aside and then look away, as if the looking were the cruelty and not the stepping aside. She did not stand. She did not defend herself. She sat in her chair and let the silence do what silence does in a room full of frightened people. She let it grow until it became uncomfortable, then let it grow more, until it became unbearable, until the silence itself became a kind of argument, and Nils Thorsen sat back down and the conversation moved on to numbers and timelines that no longer mattered. Afterward, in the parking lot, Dagny Hoagie was leaning against Maren's truck. Dagny was 68, the last of the women who had fished alongside Halvor's generation. Her knees had taken her off the water 6 years ago, but she spent every morning on the harbor wall with a thermos of coffee, watching the fleet, cataloging who went where and came back with what. She knew the waters off Ravik better than any chart. "He's not wrong," Dagny said quietly. "He's not right either." "Your hands, Maren." "My hands work. I watched you try to open your truck door 3 minutes ago. It took you 2 tries, and the second one you used your elbow." Maren leaned against the fender and said nothing. The night was cold and clear, the harbor below them lit by sodium lamps that turned everything the color of old brass. She could see the gnat's veil in her berth, dark and patient, rocking gently in the swell. Beyond the breakwater, the sea was black and flat and endless. "My father had working hands," Maren said finally. "Working legs. Working eyes. A body that did everything he asked of it right up until the end. And he sat in that kitchen and he quit. He had everything, Dagny. He had everything, and he let it go." Dagny was quiet for a long time. When she spoke, her voice was lower, and she said something Maren did not expect. "You don't know why he stopped. I was there. I watched it happen. You were a child. Children see actions. They don't see reasons." Maren looked at her. Dagny's face in the sodium light was all angles and shadow, carved by decades of salt wind. The face of a woman who had spent half a century reading water and weather and the things people refused to say aloud. "There are things I could tell you about your father," Dagny said, "about why he made the choice he made. But not tonight. Tonight you should go home and rest your hands and think about whether fighting is always the same as being brave." She walked away down the hill toward the harbor before Maren could ask what she meant. Maren watched her go, a dark shape moving slowly against the lights below, and felt something shift in the foundations of the anger she had carried for 20 years, a faint crack in masonry she had believed was permanent. The weeks that followed were a slow campaign of erosion. Nordsee's lawyers filed their formal legal challenge to Ravik's ancestral fishing rights. The document ran 214 pages, and it was meticulous. Detailed maps of the village's fishing grounds, precise catch volumes for the past 3 seasons, route patterns used by the remaining captains, seasonal migration data for cod populations, an economic analysis that painted the portrait of an industry already dead, still twitching from reflex alone. The court date was set for late September, 5 months away. The arithmetic said Ravik was finished. Maren read the filing 3 times in her kitchen, the pages spread across the table under the overhead light. On the 3rd pass, she stopped on page 47 and felt something go cold in her chest. The route patterns. the detailed yield data, the seasonal charts showing where cod migrated and when. This was not public information. These specifics, the route coordinates especially, existed in only one place outside Marin's head. In the handwritten logbooks she kept aboard the Natsvale. She had shared those logbooks with exactly one person. She closed the filing. She placed both hands flat on the table and watched the tremor run through her fingers, her body's constant small betrayal, and she let the knowledge settle into her the way cold water settles into a hull breach. Slowly at first, almost imperceptibly, then all at once, undeniable and rising. Jonas. She did not confront him. She did not call Dagny. She did not tell anyone. She went to bed that night and lay in the dark, staring at the ceiling, her hands clenched into fists against the shaking. And she thought about her brother in this same kitchen 2 months earlier, telling her about Strand's people in town, his face arranged in that careful blankness. And she understood at last what the blankness was. It was not indifference. It was not restraint. It was guilt. She rebuilt the logic the way you rebuild a net, strand by strand, testing each connection before trusting it with weight. Jonas had access to the logbooks. Jonas had reason to meet with Nordsea's representatives. He could claim he was scouting the buyout terms, protecting Marin's interests. The information flow made sense. Routes, yields, operational details, all of it passing from Jonas to Strand's lawyers, assembled into a legal weapon aimed at the village's heart. And she understood why. Jonas did not want money. He wanted one thing, to stop watching his sister die. If the village accepted the buyout, Marin would have funds for treatment and no boat to kill herself on. Jonas had watched their father die at 13, helpless, unable to change a thing, and that helplessness had carved something out of him that never grew back. Now he was watching it happen again, watching the person he loved most destroy herself in the name of the same stubbornness he believed had killed Halvar. His betrayal was an act of love. Marin understood this completely. It did not make it hurt less. For 3 days, she said nothing and changed nothing. She went out on the Natsvale with Jonas at the helm and her crew hauling nets and the catch coming in thin. Always thin now from the grounds Jonas had reported, the obvious ones, the ones every captain in Ravik knew. She watched her brother work. She watched the efficiency of his movements, the way he checked rigging and read weather, the way his eyes tracked her hands when he thought she was focused on the sonar. She let him see the logbooks. She let him see the routes. On the 4th day, she began to lie. She altered the logbooks. Carefully. She was far too smart for anything crude. She shifted route coordinates by small degrees, nudged positions a few miles off. She recorded false catches in barren grounds. She left the altered books where Jonas would find them during his pre-dawn checks, because Jonas always checked, and she knew he would deliver the data to Strand. She turned her brother's betrayal into a weapon pointed at the man trying to kill her village. Then she went to see Dagny. The old woman was on the harbor wall at dawn, wool coat buttoned to her chin, thermos steaming. Marin sat on the cold stone beside her. "I need to know about my father," Marin said. "I know. You said he didn't quit because he was weak." Dagny unscrewed her thermos and poured coffee into the cap. She held it out. Marin took it with both hands, pressing them together around the warmth, hiding the tremor in the act of drinking. "Halvar came to me toward the end," Dagny said, "after the last treatment failed. He was not a man who talked about his feelings. You know this, you are exactly the same, but that morning he talked. He said he had watched you on the water since you were a girl. He said he could see what you were becoming. He said you were going to be better than him, and he meant it as a fact, not a compliment." She paused. A boat engine coughed to life somewhere below them, the sound carrying flat across the still harbor. "He said that if he kept going out, if he kept fighting the disease the way you wanted him to, you would be there for it. You would watch him collapse on the deck. You would watch the sea take him apart, piece by piece, until there was nothing left of the man who had taught you that the water was a place where people became more than they were. And he said that would teach you the wrong lesson. It would teach you that the sea destroys people, that the thing he loved most in the world was the thing that broke him. So he stopped," Marin said. "He stopped so you wouldn't have to watch. He thought that if he went quietly, at home, In a bed, you would remember the captain, not the dying. He thought he was protecting you from the worst thing a parent can give a child, the memory of their suffering. Marin's hands were shaking badly now. Not the neurological tremor, something older, something structural, something that had lived behind a locked door in her body for 20 years and was now pressing against it with the weight of everything she had refused to feel. He was wrong, she said, and her voice was thick. I didn't remember the captain. I remembered the kitchen. I remembered the window and the cold coffee and the way he wouldn't look at the water. I remembered the quitting, Dagny. That's all I kept. I know, Dagny said softly. He was wrong about a lot of things. But he was not wrong about loving you. About that, he was exact. They sat on the wall for a long time without speaking. The boats went out one by one, their running lights sliding across the dark water like slow-moving stars. And Marin held the cup of coffee in her trembling hands and let herself feel, for the first time since she was 22 years old, the possibility that her father's surrender was not cowardice, that a person could lay down their weapon out of love and still be brave, that the act she had spent her adult life running from, the act of stopping, was not always the same as the act of giving up. But she was not going to stop. Not yet. Not because she was brave and not because she was stubborn, although she was both. Because 400 people lived in this village, and they were running out of time, and she was the only one left who knew where the fish were. The village council met on a Thursday to vote on the buyout. 14 members around the long table. Through the window, the harbor, the remaining boats, the breakwater going white with waves. 7-6 in favor of accepting. One vote remained. Marin voted no. Anders Kvistad slammed the table. 2 members walked out. The Nordsee representative made a note on her phone with the calm of someone watching a predicted outcome. But the vote held. And in the silence that followed, Marin announced what she intended to do. A demonstration voyage. She would take the Natsvale into the disputed waters and bring back a catch large enough to prove, in court, beyond argument, that the grounds were viable. Catch logs as evidence. GPS tracks filed with the court. Physical proof stacked in crates for anyone with eyes. Nils Thorson, still present in the gallery with his buyout check long since cashed, leaned forward. You can barely walk across a room. I don't fish with my legs, Marin said. The silence that followed was different from the silences before. This one had a quality of vertigo to it. The sensation of standing at an edge and not knowing whether the next step was a bridge or a fall. Marin spent 3 weeks preparing. She chose 4 crew members, selected for the specific quality of seeing a bad situation clearly and showing up anyway. She overhauled the Natsvale stem to stern and planned her route with military precision. And here is where the false trail she had been laying through Jonas became the hinge on which everything turned. For weeks, the altered logbooks had flowed from the Natsvale's wheelhouse through Jonas to Nordsee's legal team. Strand now believed the last productive fishing grounds lay in the southern sector near the Brenholmen Shoals, exactly where Marin's fabricated data showed healthy cod stocks. In reality, the Brenholmen grounds had been in steady decline for years. The real grounds, the ones that still held enormous, self-sustaining populations of Atlantic cod, lay 40 nautical miles to the north, in a deep water channel called the Svarthav Trench. Marin had discovered 2 seasons earlier on a solo run, an anomalous sonar reading that she had chased on instinct and found to be a reservoir of life in water so deep and cold that no one had thought to look there. She had told no one, not her crew, not the council, not the other captains, and crucially not Jonas. She had recorded those catches under falsified coordinates in a separate log that she kept locked in a drawer at home. If Strand tried to block her demonstration voyage, and he would, because a successful run would demolish his legal case, he would send his trawlers to the Brenholmen Shoals. He would be waiting in the wrong water, guarding an empty room, while Marin fished the real grounds 40 miles away. The night before she sailed, Jonas came to the house. He brought beer, which was unusual, and he sat at the kitchen table in their father's chair and looked at his sister with an expression she had seen before on their father in the last months, when the fighting was done and all that remained was the act of looking at someone you love while something terrible happens. Don't go, Jonas said. Jonas, your hands. The forecast. You know what autumn does to the North Atlantic? I've fished in autumn since I was 19. Not like this. He set down his beer. His knuckles were white around the bottle. Not when you can't hold on. Maren studied him. She looked at the tension in his jaw, the wet shine in his eyes, the way he gripped that bottle, as if it were the only solid object in the room. Every word he spoke was powered by the same engine that had driven the betrayal, the image of her body failing on open water, the memory of their father's face turned away from the sea. I'll be fine, she said. You don't know that. No one ever knows that. That's what the water is. He left at 10. Maren sat alone and flexed her hands open, closed, open, closed. The disease was accelerating. Within a year, she might not walk at all. She filed this the way she filed weather, conditions to acknowledge and navigate around. She left the harbor at 3 in the morning. The Nats Vale cleared the breakwater and turned north, and the lights of Ravik fell away behind her until there was nothing left but the engine and the sea and a sky so full of stars it looked like the universe was leaking. She had not told Jonas she was leaving early. She had not told him the heading. When he reached the dock at 4 and found the berth empty, he stood there for a long time, staring at the vacant water where the boat had been. And he knew what the empty space meant. She knew. About all of it. Day 1 was calm. The Nats Vale made good time north along the coast, past the Brenholmen Shoals, where Maren did not stop because there was nothing there worth stopping for, and into the open ocean. The crew was quiet, working with the focused efficiency of people who understand the stakes. They knew about her condition. Everyone in Ravik knew. They had come because Maren chose them for exactly the qualities she needed. The willingness to follow a woman with a broken body into dangerous water because they believed what she believed, that the village was worth the risk. By evening the weather turned. The swell built from the northwest in long, heavy rollers that lifted the Nats Vale and set her down with a shudder that traveled through the hull like a heartbeat. Maren stood at the wheel, reading the sea through the soles of her boots, through the deck plates, through the bones of her feet, the way Halvar had taught her, interpreting the ocean with her body, because instruments only tell you what has already happened. Her hands were bad. The cold accelerated the tremor, and she gripped the wheel with both hands just to keep it from spinning free. Twice her right hand seized completely, the fingers locking into a claw that took 4 agonizing minutes to pry open. She did this below deck, alone, her teeth clamped against the pain. When she came back up, her face showed nothing. They reached the Svarthav Trench at dawn on day 2. The water here was different. Darker. Colder. The depth sounder showed the bottom falling away, 200 meters, 300, 400, and then the signal fragmented, scattering off something vast and moving below. Fish. A massive school of cod, holding in the deep channel, where upwelling currents carried nutrients from the ocean floor. The sonar screen lit up like a city scene from the air. Maren gave the order. Set nets. What followed took 11 hours. The nets went down and came up full. Again. 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 Cod spilled across the deck in silver avalanches, thrashing, gasping, alive, their scales catching the weak northern light like coins thrown on stone. The crew worked without stopping, gutting and packing and icing, their hands raw, their backs aching, while Maren directed from the wheelhouse. She directed from the wheelhouse because by midday her legs had stopped working entirely. She had not told the crew. She had wedged herself between the console and the chart table, bracing her hips against the bulkhead so she could stay vertical, and she gave orders through the open wheelhouse door, her voice clear, her mind precise, her hands gripping the edge of the table to mask the shaking, her eyes tracking the sonar and the weather and the net positions with the same diamond-hard attention she had brought to every day on the water for 23 years. Her body was failing. Her brain was not. And the brain was what the fish cared about. The catch was staggering. More cod than the Nats Vale had carried in a single voyage in 5 seasons. The hold filled. They packed fish in the passageways, on the deck, in every container aboard. The sonar showed the school barely diminished. The Svarthav Trench was a reservoir, living proof that the waters off Ravik were not dying but thriving, in a place no one had thought to look. Then the storm arrived. It came from the northwest like a door slamming. A wall of black clouds swallowed the horizon in 20 minutes. Wind went from 15 knots to 45 in the time it took to lash down the last net. The Nats Vale rolled 30 degrees to starboard and hung, the deck tilting toward vertical, fish sliding in a silver cascade toward the gunwale. And Maren screamed the order to cut lines, secure loose gear, get below. Her crew went below. Maren could not follow. The companionway ladder required legs, and hers were gone. She dragged herself to the wheelhouse bulkhead and braced against it, and the storm hit with the full concentrated fury of the North Atlantic. A wave caught the Nats Vale broadside. The boat rolled 45 degrees. Maren's grip failed. Her hands simply opened, the nerves refusing the signal, and she slid across the deck, hit the port gunwale at full force, and felt two ribs crack with a sound like sticks breaking underwater. She lay in 6 inches of freezing water, unable to breathe, unable to move, fish piled against her legs. The sky a roaring chaos of black cloud and white spray. Eric found her. The youngest crewman, 19 years old, built like a draft horse, crawled across the canted deck on hands and knees and dragged her back to the wheel. He propped her upright. She could not close her hands around the spokes. She pressed her wrists together on either side of the wheel, trapping the spoke between her forearms like a vice, and she turned the Nats Vale into the wind. The boat steadied. The roll eased. She held that heading for 6 hours. 6 hours with broken ribs and dead hands, holding the wheel between her wrists, her weight shifting with each wave to keep pressure on the spokes, her voice never stopping. Pump the bilge, check the hull, monitor the engine, keep the catch secured. 6 hours of the sea trying to kill her, and the disease trying to cripple her, and Maren Solberg refusing both with the only tools she had left, her mind, her voice, and 2 forearms pressed together around a wooden wheel. When the storm finally broke, the Nats Vale was still afloat. The catch was aboard, and Maren was still at the helm, propped against the console like a figure carved from driftwood, her face gray, her eyes open, her hands locked in position around the spokes with a grip so rigid that Eric had to pry her fingers apart one by one while she watched, detached, as if the hands belonged to someone else. 340 nautical miles to the south, Eirik Strand's fleet of 4 industrial trawlers had spent 2 days working the Brennholmen Shoals. They had caught almost nothing. The grounds were barren, exactly as Maren had known, and Strand's vessels sat idle in calm water while the woman he had dismissed limped home with a hold full of proof. Jonas was standing on the dock when the Nats Vale rounded the breakwater. The entire village was there. Word had traveled that Maren was caught in a storm, and for 12 hours no one could raise her on the radio. The antenna had gone in the first hour of heavy wind. In those 12 hours, the people of Ravik had done something collectively, without planning or discussion. They had gathered on the dock, in the rain, in the cold, 400 people standing at the edge of the water, staring at the empty horizon, waiting for a boat they were no longer certain still existed. When the Nats Vale appeared, low in the water, heavy with her catch, limping slightly from the storm damage, the sound that rose from the dock was not a cheer. It was something more primal, the sound of a village exhaling after holding its breath for half a day. Maren could not walk to the rail. Eric carried her to a crate on the foredeck, and from there she watched her crew unload the catch, crate after crate of Atlantic cod, stacked on the dock and towers that rose until they blocked the harbor office from view. The evidence was overwhelming. The grounds were alive. The village's claim was real. The fish were there, and the woman everyone said was finished had brought them home. Jonas stood at the edge of the crowd, motionless. Maren was looking directly at him. She had been looking at him since the moment the Nats Vale touched the dock, and he knew, from the absolute steadiness of her gaze and a body that could not stop trembling, that she had known everything for weeks, and that the empty berth at 4 in the morning had not been an accident. The hearing took place in Tromsø 3 weeks later. Maren attended in a wheelchair. Her lawyer submitted the catch logs, GPS tracks, sonar data, biological samples. The evidence of the Svarthav Trench was incontestable. Nordsea's team presented their own case. The route data from Maren's falsified logbooks, the Brennholmen projections, the commercial insignificance analysis. And then Marin's lawyer asked one question that made Strand's lead attorney go very still. Can your client explain why his trawlers were positioned at the Brenholman Shoals during the exact period our client was fishing the Svarthav Trench? The question detonated silently. Everyone in the courtroom understood. Nordsee had advanced knowledge of Marin's plans. They had positioned their fleet to interfere. And they had been catastrophically wrong, because the intelligence they relied on had been designed to be wrong, fed to them by someone inside Marin's own operation, someone who had been, without knowing it, delivering a weapon assembled by the woman he was trying to save. The court ruled for Ravik. Ancestral fishing rights upheld. Challenge dismissed. The judge noted that the petitioner's evidence had been obtained through channels she termed irregular and unreliable, and that the respondent's direct proof of viable operations was compelling and without serious dispute. In the corridor outside, Marin waited in her wheelchair. Jonas came to her. He stood with his hands buried in his pockets, his shoulders drawn up, his body trying to fold into itself. How long did you know? He asked. Since the filing. Page 47. Marin, I know why you did it. He looked at the floor. The muscles in his jaw flexed and released, flexed and released. She recognized the expression. She had worn it herself for 2 decades, the face of a person who had tried to protect someone they loved and discovered that the protection was its own kind of damage. You wanted me to stop, she said. I wanted to keep you alive. Those are not the same thing. He met her eyes. For Dad, they were. There it was. The shared wound, opened under fluorescent lights in a government hallway. The same dead father. The same lesson learned in opposite directions. Marin had watched Halvar stop and sworn she never would. Jonas had watched Halvar die and sworn he would never be helpless again. The same love. The same grief. 2 completely different kinds of betrayal. Dagny told me something, Marin said quietly. Dad didn't stop because he was weak. He stopped because he couldn't bear for me to watch him break apart on the water. He thought he was protecting me. Jonas said nothing. He was wrong. But he wasn't a coward. She paused. And neither are you. You were wrong, Jonas. But you are not a coward. He knelt beside her wheelchair. He took her hands, the hands that could no longer close, that had held a boat through a 6-hour storm, that had written the false logbooks that saved a village. And he pressed his forehead against her knuckles, and he wept. Not quietly. The kind of crying that comes from a place so deep you didn't know it was there until it emptied. And Marin sat and let him. Because this was the only thing left to do. The Natsvale sailed again the following spring. Jonas at the helm. Marin's crew under his command. And Marin was on the harbor wall at dawn, sitting beside Dagny in the cold air, her wheelchair positioned at the exact spot where Dagny had spent 6 years watching boats go out. She watched the Natsvale clear the breakwater and turn north, and she did not call it quitting. She called it something she had never had a word for, the act of letting go, not because you are finished, but because you have done what needed doing, and the people you did it for are strong enough now to carry it. Eirik Strand resigned as CEO the following year. In an interview, he said he had forgotten what a fishing village was for. He said he had confused efficiency with purpose. He said he had been outmaneuvered by a woman who understood the difference. Marin lived 4 more years. The disease took everything her body had to give. Her hands, her arms, her voice. Jonas came every day. He read her the Natsvale's logs in the kitchen on Brigavine, and she listened with the same fierce attention she had always given the water, her mind recording every detail even as the rest of her drew further away. On the last morning, Jonas described a new school of cod found east of the Svarthav Trench. He told her about the sonar readings, the size of the school, the color of the water at dawn, how it had gone from black to silver to pale gold in the space of 10 minutes, and how the fish had risen to the surface in that light like something being offered. Marin's eyes were closed. Her breathing was shallow and slow. But when Jonas finished, the corner of her mouth shifted, barely, just enough, toward something that looked like a smile. She died that evening at 47. Ravik flew their flags at half-mast for a week, longer than they had flown them for anyone in living memory. On the morning the flags came down, every boat in the harbor, 14 now, up from 6, sounded their horns in a single sustained blast that hit the cliffs and rolled out across the water and faded into the sound of the sea itself. On the harbor wall in Ravik, there is a bench. It faces the water. No plaque, no name, no inscription. But if you go early enough, before dawn, when the running lights are sliding across the dark harbor and the engines are coughing to life, you will find it occupied. Someone will always be sitting there, watching the boats go out, counting the ones that come back, keeping the only record that matters. The sea does not destroy people. It shows you who they are.